it's Elizabeth with the Kenai Community Library, and today's class is going to be another quilt block for our community quilt. Hopefully you guys are making your quilt blocks to bring in and have a nice community quilt that we can hang on our wall. So today's class is going to be on the log cabin quilt block, and it's a little bit more advanced, kind of a lot of cutting, but it's the first quilt block that my grandmother and I actually did together. So I've got most of everything cut out already. We'll have a list here in a couple seconds of all of the different size fabrics you're going to need. But pretty much what you're going to need is about 6 different colored fabrics that are dark, 6 colored fabrics that are kind of on the lighter side, or you can do 3 and 3 and kind of have a couple repeating patterns, whatever works for you and whatever is in your scrap pile. Again, we're trying to make sure that this is all kind of fun, scrappy quilt. So I have my middle block. It's 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches, which if you remember our 9 patch, that's exactly our 9 patch. So if you have an extra piece from your 9 patch left over, that can be your middle block. Then we have to cut them out 1.5 inches and then different lengths. And as you can see here, I've got my darks all laid out and I've got my lights laid out here. I've got to cut a couple more of my lights. What I need is a 6.5 inch, and see here, I've got my 1.5 inches already laid out. And then I need to do a 6.5 inch. So I place my ruler here, grab my rotary cutter, bink. There is my 6.5 inch. That's going to go right there. And now I need one more of 5.5 inch. And isn't that some fun fabric we still have at the library? So we're going to use this fabric, and I'm going to turn it this way. And we'll get a good 12-inch piece here. And we're just going to quickly cut off this extra. Oh. Again, remember, make sure that your rotary cutter is nice and sharp. And then we're going to go ahead and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 makes 1.5 inches. So there we go. There's our 1.5 inches wide, and this one needs to be 5.5 inches long. So we're going to go at our we got our last little light. So we will now put the cutting instructions up for a couple seconds so you can pause it and you can get all your measurements and all the different cuts that you need to do. If you don't have a rotary mat and a board, you can always use a ruler, pencil, and you can draw out your blocks that you need, and then you can pin those onto your fabric and cut them out. Okay, so now we're ready to do the layout. We've got everything cut up. We have our 3.5 inch square by 3.5 inch square that's going to go in the middle. Then we'll show you the directions that we have. We're going to put our first smallest light on top, and then we're going to go here. Now you might see that there's a little bit of a difference, and that is a-okay. Because what's going to happen is we're going to do a seam allowance here, and that's going to actually cut down by 1/4 inch. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and use our dark and our other dark, and then our next light. And you see how our lights, and we're just kind of going around with the darks and then the lights. So that's actually going to be kind of a fun block. You could also go the other way, put the lights on one side, put the darks on the other. We could also go ahead, and go light, dark, light, dark, and just kind of have fun going that way too. It really all depends on what you want for your quilt block. But again, we'll show you the directions on how to lay out this Lincoln log quilt block, and we hope that you guys are having fun. Okay everybody, so I've got my block laid out here, and I decided instead of kind of going light, light, dark, dark, I did light, dark, and as you can see, this is how I have it laid out. So let's get started sewing. My interior block and my first light color, I'm just going to flip over right like this. And again, we're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance on our sewing machine. So I'm just going to place this into my sewing machine, and then I'm going to sew it. And I'm going to finger press my seam open and right sides together and see how that fits. Boom! Ta-da! And then we're going to sew it together. Okay, and then again with our 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure our needle's up. Make sure we like how that looks coming across. You can kind of tell that I got a little bit over my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to kind of finger press that out, take my next piece, lay it down here. You can also take a pin and pin it if that's going to help you some, and that will just help you to kind of keep the fabric together. So see how cool our block is kind of coming out? And we're just going to continue putting this all together. Oops, I grabbed the wrong one. You gotta also remember where you're going from. But it's kind of easy because you could tell that that piece was too long. And this piece looks just right. There's our first row of logs. Then I think I'll go this way because I kind of want that cupcake right like that. And see how it all fits. Again, press it out. So you see how I'm kind of going over a little bit, and that's okay. We're just going to take our next piece and we're going to just line it up here. Because not everything is perfect, our cuts aren't going to be perfect, our sewing isn't going to be perfect. And that's the fun thing about quilting, is it doesn't have to be perfect. The only person that's going to see the mistakes are you. Everybody else is going to think that you took a lot of time and a lot of effort to get something done, and you did. So that's kind of pretty. Take my next light colored. actually, trying to figure out how that pigeon head's gonna come up and be nice. Oh, needle needs to be up. And push that out. We're getting a little bit on the long side, but that's okay. It matches up here. And that's the important part. And now for our other dark. The important thing about quilting and sewing is having fun with fabrics that you like. So this is getting a little bit big, so I'm just going to put a couple pins in just to help keep it together. And then back to the sewing machine. Okay. So there's our block, and as you can see, we've only got 2 more left to do. 4 more. Now, if you were to hand sew it, you do the exact same thing. And like our first class, we talked about taking a pencil and a ruler and just marking out your 1/4 inch seam. That way you can do your running stitch along your 1/4 inch seam. It's going to take you a little bit longer than if you were to use a sewing machine, but you can definitely still hand stitch it. And then back to our dark. Because this one's kind of a thin fabric and it's not pressed too good. That's my own fault. It's kind of looking fun and cool. Instead of hand pressing, you can also take the time to take it to your iron and you can press it that way. Whatever you want to do, whatever is easiest for you. You could also have the radio playing in the background. Sometimes I like to listen to an audiobook while I'm quilting. And guess what, everybody? If you make a block with us, you're definitely a quilter because you've made a quilt block. So, okay. And then our last but not least beautiful piece is going to go here. Sew this into place. Again, if you haven't figured out, we sew with the 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is just about at this corner of this foot. And you don't have to do any reversing because what happens is we're going to sew all the blocks together and that's going to close in all your stitches. So you don't have to do any reverse. So, ta-da! Here we have our log cabin quilt block for our community quilt. With fabric that the library had on hand that we've made masks for staff with and everything else, so staff can come up and look at this and have a nice fun remembrance from this time. So I hope you guys enjoy your quilt blocks and get quilting.